one thing I wanted to do was to pick up something from last night's conversation. And actually, it was something that you said, Janice, that kind of caught my ear. And so last night, Mark did this wonderful presentation about publishing. Now, the part of publishing that he talked about is really, it's more self-publishing. He was accurate about the I liked the information he presented about the economics of publishing and how books are priced and sales are figured and advances are calculated and how you're paid your advance and earning back your advance. And by the way, one of the interesting things to know is that if you get a large chunk of change for an advance and your book does not earn out that advance, you do not owe the publisher that amount. There are many of us who have benefited from that. I mean, and that's the great mystery of publishing. Like, why do publishers pay large sums, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to acquire a book and then put no marketing behind it, as if it's just going to sell itself, when you yourself know when you walk into a bookstore or go on Amazon that you're flooded with choices? How do you get someone's attention to a book? So anyway, that was great, but I was really struck by this comment about Grammarly standing in for grammar. And what I picked up was from the following discussion that followed that was this unease with grammar. And I want to address that because I think it's important to know that grammar is, maybe it has a bad reputation from grammar school and from the deadly dull English courses, fifth grade and sixth grade. But grammar is really just in the service of meaning and storytelling. So I myself am not clear why grammar is such a hurdle for people. We speak every day. We tell stories every day. We convey information every day. So we're practicing grammar 24/7. So I'm not sure why it's such a hurdle, but it looms as this hurdle for people. And I personally think that part of the problem is that this fear of grammar is a coded way of referencing other or signaling other problems in storytelling or in the narrative or in the information telling. And I don't want to suggest that I don't struggle with grammar. I mean, the things I struggle with are doing narratives, telling people stories. Usually I have a limited amount of space to do it. And I've got to cram in a lot of information, a lot of details about someone's life. And I'll show you an example. And I have to cram in a lot of information. Cramming in a lot of information in a little space is a challenge for a lot of reasons, because you don't necessarily tell something in sequence. You follow threads of ideas more often, as well as tell things in sequence. And sometimes the thread of the point you want to make gets to the landing area before the necessary information does, and you have to solve that problem. So writing is very much a series of problem-solving matters all the time. I mean, it's much more than that. But within the story you want to tell, there is a lot of problem solving that's going on. And I mean, I can show you a paragraph where I agonized for hours to get the sequence of information right. And, you know, on one level, you could say it was a problem of grammar because the tenses had to match and it had to be the hard past before it could be the pending past, before it could be the past perfect. And so there were all these grammatical facts to invoke, but the issue really wasn't grammar. The issue was really figuring out how to tell the story. So I wanted to bring that up, and I guess focus a little bit on what people mean by grammar, why it seems to be such a problem, or why it looms as such a problem, when really grammar is just the smoothing of things, and really isn't the bugaboo that it's cracked up to be. But I think hordes of bad English teachers have scarred people. So I'm going to rely on you people to tell me. And maybe Janice, you want to start because you brought it up last night in a way that I thought was interesting, and it flowered into a discussion of Grammarly, which I thought was really fascinating. I love Mark's perspective on it and the vulnerabilities in it from a cyber security expert. But perhaps you can say a little bit about what you meant by grammar and what kinds of things are issues for you. Because what I want to do is I want to clear the path for everybody. I want people to feel that if they can have a conversation, they can write. May not write the same way, but I want to clear the path and make it easy and get beyond this idea of grammar, or that whenever they talk, they're grammar police waiting to jump on them. So help me out here, guys.
Well, I could definitely tell you. So I definitely was scarred by some horrific English teachers with the red, with that red pen, who
yes.
slash and burn your papers.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, once you have that, you're like, oh my God, there's that red pen. But I have learned from Grammarly, at least, that some of my issues, which I've definitely corrected, I still sometimes have it, but it's lessened, is that I was writing passively, not actively, which I didn't even know what passive and active was. And apparently is very common with women, having now done the research on this, that women tend to write passively than active, which I found personally fascinating and made complete sense to me. So I have that. Then I had the comma police. I didn't know what an Oxford comma was. Now I do. Sometimes I get lazy and I just let Grammarly fix it for me, because a lot of it though is my brain and what I want to get on paper is going so fast in my mind that, like, so let's say I'm vomiting, not to be gross, but vomiting on the paper, right? And then after I do that, I have to go back and clean it. And it's kind of like, oh, this is horrible, right? Like, you get it out and now you got to go back and clean it. Like you said, I never thought about it, but some of it is sequencing. So I have that issue. Then making sure my tenses are all consistent. That rears its head. And then a lot of times I think people know what I'm saying, and like, because it's clear to me. And so I make assumptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without realizing it. And I need to, like what you said last week with the 3Ds, apparently I never heard of that, but I am doing that. I'm using labels to summarize what I want to say rather than describing.
Mm-hmm.
So you explained that was extremely helpful, because I found myself doing that all the time. Like, I will say the person's angry rather than explaining why or how that person is angry, and the person comes to the conclusion themselves.
Right.
right? Because it's obvious the person's angry when you describe them, how the person
Behavior.
right,
Yeah.
the behavior. You understand that, but I will just sum it up and simplify. So very pragmatically, I will. So yeah, we could keep going on my writing issues.
Okay. So you brought up a bunch of very, very
A treasure
interesting.
trove of things to keep you busy for the next 52 weeks of pandemic.
Right. So these are great things to talk about because the passive versus the active voice. And I I wouldn't classify that as a grammar problem. It's described as, passive, active. Those are things talked about, in grammar. But I would say that's really a judgment of storytelling. Someone did this, rather than this was done. I have to say, in the academic world, academics are encouraged to write in passive voice. It's really part of the training. It's the way scientific papers are done. It's the way things are expressed. You can hedge a little more. There's a little bit more room in the passive voice. So I would venture to say that the distinction of writing passive voice versus active voice, I myself never noticed a difference between male and female writers in the use of it. And certainly not in years of editing that I could point out. It may be that I'm dealing mostly with professional writers, and so I never get to see it, where most professional writers are not writing in the passive voice unless something demands to be in the passive voice. Because active muscular verbs are your greatest ally in writing. They carry a lot of weight. They do a lot of heavy lifting. They pull your story forward, whatever your story is, whether it's just pure information or the telling of someone's life. They really carry it forward. And I personally don't write without a thesaurus as a backup because I want to impale a thought on a word. So I don't want just an approximate verb. I don't want he did this. I want a sharply defined statement of what he or she did. Um, so I need help doing that. And I wade into the forest of words. I'll pick a word that's very close to what I mean, and I will wade into the forest and look at synonyms, and then maybe find a synonym, because the synonyms are all tinged with some other connotation or some other slightly tangential idea. And I want the one that's exactly right and that conveys all of what I want to say. Sometimes my foray into the forest comes up empty-handed and I've got the right word first time. But I think it's a practice that everybody should engage in. And that is just for fun and education, and just opening up your brain to the many, many ways of expressing something. It's very freeing. It's really very liberating to see how many choices there are and how many might come closer to exactly what you want to say or carry a slightly shaded meaning that has more of the suggestion you want people to have about the action that was taking place. So my recommendation is jump into the thesaurus, keep it open in the background, read it for fun, and use it especially for verbs, because the verbs really are the convey the most in whatever you're going to tell. And do not rely on adjectives, because they'll just load up whatever you want to say, and kind of weigh it down. And it's the verbs that spring you forward and get the sharp, clear picture in someone's mind of what it is you want to tell, and they help you clarify your own ideas. So that's my thought for the moment on verbs, and always going for the active verb wherever you can. Commas, frankly, I wouldn't worry about. I mean, the classic example of the Oxford comma was summarized in the title of the book that became a bestseller. Every librarian and grammarian's favorite book, Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. Is it eats, comma, shoots, comma, and leaves, 3 verbs in a row, where the Oxford comma after the second before the end would indicate how you read that sentence, or is it eats, shoots, and leaves and walks away? So I'm definitely a fan of the Oxford comma. I can tolerate it not being there, but I wouldn't obsess about it. And I mean, one way to think about it is, although editors hate inconsistency, if you find that you're in a situation where the word before and requires a comma for meaning, put it in, let someone else take it out. It never hurts. I mean, the Oxford comma does no damage. Leaving it out sometimes does damage. But I wouldn't obsess about that. It is, by the way, a fun thing to obsess about. And I, as an editor, I can tell you how many conversations verging on arguments, verging on fist fights I've witnessed over many years of people who are very passionate on the topic. And people who write care about these things. And it's kind of charming that they do. But if you could imagine a fist fight over a comma. And as for minds going fast, that's a really great thing. And that's why the computer is great, because it goes fast. And that's also why, if you ever intend to write at all, you simply have to have some method of note-taking with you all the time, whether it's a pad and pen, as I always have, plus my mobile device to take notes. There is no creativity without capturing your ideas, and you have to capture them. And minds do go quickly, and sometimes you just have to write down a word. Your mind is going quickly. You have to write down a couple of words, also a couple of connecting words, so that you know the relationship of one thing to another, of an idea that just sped through your head. But it's really essential to capture it the first time you have it, and to capture a keyword that 10 hours later, in a completely different context with a full belly, you're going to look at and need to reconstruct in your brain whatever your meaning was. I'm as guilty as the last person for sometimes not capturing, as any person, for not capturing enough information. And sometimes I look at my notes and I go, I wonder what I was thinking there. I can't reconstruct it in my brain, so that idea is lost. But that doesn't happen too often. It does happen. So your mind going quickly is, don't wait for your fingers on the computer to do all the work. Quickly write down something on a pad next to you, a key word, a word that'll capture what it was that was flitting through your brain. You've got to do that. It's just essential, because we're all smart, we're all thinking lots of things, and ideas just run through the brain. You've got to find a way to hold on to them in some way. And so those are my thoughts on the important issues that Janice raised. I wonder if grammar raises other questions for other people that's worth talking about.
I will say I do keep a pad by my bed, because I tend to find when I'm trying to sleep or when I first wake up that seems to be my best thought. So I have a pad by my bed.
Even at the computer, though, when I'm writing, sometimes, I'm writing something and I'm working on a problem, but sometimes another thought comes into my head and I just have to stop for a second and write down a couple of key words. That's how fast things can happen. So.
And I find Grammarly helpful to me it's kind of a lazy person's thesaurus. Like, if I use a word first off, I didn't realize how many times I was repeating the same word in my writing.
That's why a thesaurus is great, because it just opens up the world of possibilities, and you realize this little rut you've been in. And when I say you, I don't mean you.
No, I was.
Everybody.
It was me. I have to take ownership. But so Grammarly will suggest another word, and then sometimes, if it's not the right word, but that word fits right in that sentence, then I'll look back to where the other word was and say, oh, one of those words could, and swap it out to exactly what you're saying. But Grammarly helped identify some of my writing issues. So when you don't have an editor and you're by yourself, I find there's nobody there checking your work to make sure so I don't think it's a substitute for a great editor, but it was, for me, super helpful to identify recurring problems, which I like.
Good to use it that way.
Yeah, Mark, raised some issues about, security issues, which I'm hoping Clark will read the contract and get back to us on that. But for me, I found it not as a substitute for an editor, right? But as how to identify recurring issues that I didn't even know existed.
Right.
Apparently plagued me for my entire life. But what I had sent is, for me, learning to speak actively, while I don't think it's appropriate for everything, was very important, because when I was writing certain documents, it reinforced the passivity that I needed to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so being active voice was better in certain situations, let's say court documents, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to be active and maybe Dwayne will think otherwise, but I found that the perception changed when I started writing actively than passively. So for me, Grammarly has been a godsend.
Good. I mean,
but when I finish writing this, we'll see. Really, the edits still come back, right?
Right. So, what I'd like to do is suggest to you that don't rely on Grammarly's suggestions for substitute words. Do your own foraging for words, because you'll find meanings that you didn't even know you needed. And just tap your word into the thesaurus and just look at all the ways a word could possibly go, and other words that bear on really words or concepts. So other words that bear on that concept, many of which may be closer actually and have more of a tone or an innuendo that are closer to what you mean. You don't want to be, bravo for Grammarly, but you don't want to be restricted by someone else's suggestions. You want to do your own thinking about what you mean, because only you know what you mean. So I really would suggest doing the thesaurus.com and keep it open in the background when you're writing, and just finding so much that you didn't even know was worthy of knowing.
Great suggestion. No, thank you. That's a good, really good suggestion.
Actually, yeah, you can just keep it open in the background. Yeah. Did anyone have any other grammar horror stories too?
Mine is not exactly about grammar, but I think it's this idea still of proper and whatnot. So I love using profanity in my writing, and I'm writing predominantly to a millennial and Gen Z audience. So I think they have more of an appetite for that. But, and I think it could fall in line with the idea of, okay, if I'm going to use a curse word, I may be using that in the same way I would be using an adjective. And rather than saying, you know, dropping the F-bomb or something, like, what do I actually mean by that? So what are your thoughts on profanity?
I mean, I'm not categorically against it at all. It has its place. I mean, you know, these are some of the strongest words we have. When my younger son was about 2, he spoke with a lisp, and he would go around the house when something happened, and he'd be going, oh, there, oh, there, oh, there. No one knew what he was saying. And then one day, our nanny called me, and she said, Mrs. Marano, I figured out what Gabriel is saying. And she said, and she could barely tell me. And he was saying, oh, shit. And we figured out, here was the scenario. These are really strong words. We use them in moments of emotional salience, right? So I'd come home from work, I'd walk in the door, the kids would greet me, be happy to see me. I'd kick off my shoes, and sometimes in kicking off a shoe, I'd stub my toe on the console that was in the foyer. And I would invariably go, oh, shit. And I mean, hey, if I were listening and I were trying to dope out language, I would go, hey, that's really important. That was said really emphatically. That pierced the silence. That made an impression on me. So my son was just picking up what was in the air. And I tell you that story to point out that there's a place, and that they carry a lot of baggage, and therefore they should be deployed selectively, I think, because you just don't want to overuse them and wear them out and just kind of devolve into curse words. I don't mind curse words at all. I use them in writing, and people say them, and they're part of our language, and they're very emphatic part of our language, the way we usually use them. And I don't see why we have to hide the fact that we know them, and that we don't use them. Everybody knows what they mean. But I think there should be some strategy to harness their power and to take advantage of their power at the moments when that power is needed. So are you using are you using them in moments to express anger and those heavy duty emotions, or are you just using it to express annoyance? Or so what's the level, and what are the kinds of adjectives you wind up substituting or could substitute?
Okay.
There was so I wrote a 4,000 word piece on the N word, and while I was writing that, I came across some interviews about Richard Pryor, and the only thing about this that I think is relevant is that one of the commentaries about Richard Pryor was that every other comedian was using was using bad words to be funny, and they said Richard Pryor was funny despite his language.
Yeah, and you have to remember that when he was using that language, it was not as commonplace in everyday discourse as it is now. There was a little more shock value to it.
Right, but he wasn't, like if you listen to it, he was just talking and people were shocked that he said it, but it was in the context of
right.
what he was saying, and he wasn't using the curse word as a punchline or anything.
Right. You weren't laughing at the fact that, oh my God, he said a baddie. Yeah. I mean, and yes. And he was a great comedian. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Pamela, what were you going to say?
No. That's, well, I guess just one other thing is I feel like if you're trying to like get pieces in literary magazines, I still kind of feel like it's like, oh, don't use profanity in those. But I guess
I've seen them.
You've seen it, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, I've seen pieces on rape and other, subjects that you would find horrible. So I don't think there's any reason not to use it for that reason.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think it's taboo, especially in literary magazines. It's just that you don't want to overstay your welcome. You don't want to keep using it when another word would serve you well, when another word would give a sense more of the variety of thoughts that you had or that your speaker had, or in whose ever mouth the words are coming from. So you don't want to use it as a substitute for thinking and working hard as a writer. That's really what I mean. But it has its place. As Dwayne pointed out, it has its place, but you don't want it to be every place. And partly when it's every place, it loses its punch and it begins to feel like a 3-year-old rehearsing a dirty word it just heard, and no, I'm not supposed to say this, and and it loses the value it has of emphasis, and often because it comes out in a surprising way. So you want to harness that. You want to use them where you can, and not just strew it everywhere.
There was a whole South Park episode on what Hara just said.
There was what?
An entire episode of South Park was exactly what you just said.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
and
wow.
They said it, I think, 100 times.
That's awesome.
So,
I saw that. It was good.
Well, I mean, if someone had to precede me, I'm honored that it was South Park. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. And your preference or invocation of curse words, emphatic words, is what I mean. What's the motive? Aside from the fact that millennials get it and understand it, why that preference?
I I think it's how I speak often, actually. It's how I speak. And I think most often it's just like, oh, F, or like F this, or oh, F yeah. Like it's so it has its place for different emotions. It's not most usually directed at a person, but
Right.
at a situation like
Yeah,
F
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But you may want to think that you may find that um, that it becomes a crude stand-in, and I don't mean crude in that the language is crude, but crude in that it's only a rough approximation. It only gives you one sense of your attitude about the experience. There may be other words that more finely grained, in a more finely grained way, capture your thoughts about the situation. And so you might be just falling into this easy rut. It's just, oh, okay, fuck that. Um, and when instead, you might want to distinguish degrees of fuck. I mean, I don't know another way to say it, but there are just many other degrees of frustration, annoyance, displeasure that you may want to call on. It may help you think in a more fine-grained way, and then you reserve the heavy-duty words for the times when you really just want to convey that blunt force of frustration and annoyance with something, and there's no other meaning to it, but you just want to dig into that blunt how. So
Michael has a question for you, Hara.
sure.
Hey, Hara, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I have an update and a thank you. Our last conversation, for those who don't know me, I spoke to Hara last time about a book that I'm writing about introverted extroverts, or ambiverts. And you made the really good point that instead of focusing on the negatives, focus on the positives. And my agent wholly agreed with you. And so what we've done is we've made the book kind of talk about ambivert superpowers as the first section. And we're connecting it to people in history and currently who've had those superpowers. And then the second section is more like how to become a fully realized ambivert, which includes a dose of self-help in terms of when it leads to anxiety or stress. And then leading out with, now, how do you use those gifts in work and love? So it's moving along well. And I think your suggestion about focusing on the positive side of it really, really helps. So I wanted to say thank you again.
Well, thank you for thanking me. I'm glad I could make a suggestion that helped you. So
yeah, and so the good news is the agent that I'm working with said he's ready to sell it by September.
Wow, great.
Yeah. So the only two questions I had for you, well, I can't think of a good title. We thought of a good title, but the word ambivert is not a great word in the English language.
Nope. So here's your exercise, Michael. So you're going to write down and keep a list of every single word of thought you have about the title.
Yeah.
And don't censor yourself. Just write them all down.
Yeah.
The ones you have in the middle of the night, the ones that you have when you're in the bathroom and brushing your teeth. I mean, just whenever you get it. And just sort of try to lob some things into that ballpark.
Yeah.
And then without censoring yourself in advance, and then take a look at it.
Yeah.
And if you want to run it by me, feel free. Just shoot me an email and I'll help you think, and something comes close and maybe you want to move in this direction. And yeah, I agree with you though, Michael. It's a challenge because you're working on a concept that has an official name and you want to capture it, but it's just a dud.
Well, it's like, well, Susan Cain was really smart. Her title, Quiet,
Right.
is a beautiful word, and then it had the subtitle, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking.
Right.
So if there was a good word that encapsulated what an ambivert is, right? Like that's a good one. And so, you know, like I'm throwing all the terrible ones, you know, like balanced or double trouble or, you know, whatever.
Right, but come at it from a behavioral standpoint too. Like, what is it that ambiverts do? And sort of look at it in every possible way and just see, you know, like double talk. I mean, just go down every possible pathway that you could without censoring yourself, and then you can you could start narrowing it and getting a clear sense of what path you want to walk down that'll work. And remember that there are titles and subtitles can really do a lot of the work for you.
What's good is I have a subtitle that I'm pretty happy with, which is Reclaiming Your Gifts as an Introverted Extrovert, right? Something along those lines.
Which may change as you decide on what your title is, depending on what you need to explain. But keep going, because it sounds good. So
yeah. Oh, the Janus powers somebody put. That's cool.
Right. So there are a lot of ways to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And the other thing, this is just an interesting tidbit for others as well. I was trying to connect. To like stories of people that we might presume are or were ambiverts. And the agent said, be careful about using celebrities because celebrities are canceled left and right. Just look at Ellen DeGeneres. And so it was one of those things where I was like, oh, I never thought about that. But I'm curious, in your travels, Hara, or anybody else in the group, if you think of any people who you think are good introverted, extrovert examples, because I know a lot of celebrities, but it's hard to think of either an athlete or, you know, like Abraham Lincoln is a clear example of an extroverted extrovert, Oprah Winfrey. And I'm trying to get a diverse list that's not too over the top.
Right. And I mean, and even if you come up with an exemplar of ambiversion, you know, I mean, it's possible to even use that depending on, you know, who the person is, the Lincoln effect, you know, and kind of,
oh, that's cool,
you know, going down that path. So there are lots of ways to think, and I'm all for opening up and expanding, because the more choices you have, the more precise you're going to wind up being, and the more incisive you're going to be, and the more.
I like that, by the way. Yeah, that's really cool. I like the Lincoln effect. That's pretty cool.
Okay, so just put me in the acknowledgments, and
yeah, for sure. And I'm gonna put Doris Kearns Goodwin in acknowledgments as well. But no, I think I hear what you're saying. Is just really like let your uninhibited self just throw everything.
Yep, every possible way of slicing and dicing a title. And
the Oprah effect, the Lincoln effect, right? Like whatever.
Right. I wouldn't do the Oprah effect because there are so many things that she stands for. And more than that, I think she stands for a kind of a charisma.
Yeah.
That would be the first thing that I think of with her, and her incredibly powerful way of drawing stories out of people. So I wouldn't overplay that one. But I would do something that arouses curiosity. Janice?
She might sue you because, you know, I'm not sure what, you know, because she's a public figure with, I can't give legal advice, but I would explore before you use something like that. You want to be like sure that that's in the public domain.
Right, exactly. That's a good point.
Also, I've heard the Oprah effect a bunch of times in the last 10 years anyway, so.
Yeah, it's been used already. The Lincoln effect hasn't been, but yeah.
So, I mean, I mean, those are just different ways to think about it. And you can think about, okay, what happens to an ambivert when they walk into a room, and try to think about the behavior, and maybe thinking about it that way, something will come to mind that suggests a title. So if you look at the behaviors and the situations, you might get something out of that that's usable.
Yeah, you know what's ironic too is that Shakespeare, we have little biographical information on him, but he is the perfect exemplar of an ambivert, in a way, from his writing. But anyway, I'll tinker with it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And yeah, Shakespeare, he's our exemplar of so much, including the value of a pandemic, and what a guy with a pen can do in a pandemic, you know?
Hey, King Lear was written in a pandemic.
Exactly. So
And we're experiencing King Lear right now. So, you know.
yeah, right. Relevant, yes. So any other experiences here that we ought to talk about?
You know, I think what I learned a lot from it is trying to take the feedback of you and the agent and trying to figure out how to connect that to the voice that you already have. But I think it's a real balancing act and an art, taking in really good criticism and working that in. And you know, what's exciting is that I found that other aspects of it came about. So one of the other things that my agent said is like, ambiverts have very powerful, but they also can really screw things up when they're out of balance, when they're out of whack. And so that's another aspect of it that we want to talk about. And, you know, I'm glad that the process is taking a little longer to get that.
Uh-huh. But by having seen it through the positive lens, if I'm correct, what you're telling me is that it sort of opened up the way to see the whole thing, and probably presented something of a structure to you of how to tell the story of ambiverts and what they do. And
yeah, because one of the challenges, I think, and maybe this is helpful for other people too, the challenges of writing a book about a group is that you have to make them distinctive, and you have to say that they're something special about them. But what do you do when you're talking about a centrist or a moderate? It's not as sexy. And so how do you find that angle that holds the sexy of it, but also kind of holds the nuance of it? And I think having the positive structure helped take it in that place. But then, of course, so we're jokingly having it be like a mashup of quiet with a dose of self-help. So it's doing something like Susan Cain would do for introverts, but we're also saying, but we're also going to do that self-helpy stuff because we're psychologists.
right. Yeah, and you know, I think that's a format that works, because I mean, and you could probably integrate it into your book in any number of ways, either at chapter's end or at the end of the book, or just organically wherever it seems to show up. So, you know, to me, that becomes a problem to solve, not a major one.
Right.
Because I think often the writing suggests where it can be used. But yeah, so I like this. I like this story, Michael, and I'm sure that you're going to come up with a word that captures something about what these people do that will make it really distinctive. So
yeah.
great.
And the cool thing is, when we started it, we used the superhero analogy that, like Peter Parker or Spider-Man, he starts with tremendous amounts of empathy, and he can't figure out how to like bring that together with his superpower. And we analogize the double identity thing as what an ambivert faces, right? They're both an extrovert and an introvert, and they can't always hold the two together like a good superhero.
Mm-hmm.
So that metaphor, I think, helped us to put those pieces together of what you were suggesting.
Good. But so are you an ambivert?
Yeah, completely.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, completely. I mean, that's why it's been so confusing, because and it's funny, I work with a lot of patients and they say, listen, the stuff on introverts really speaks to me, but it doesn't get fully at who I am. And so I work with a lot of people who feel this not fully able to have something help them. So I think I think what I'm excited about is I think this is really going to speak to people and really going to help people, and also is going to build off. And you know what's cool too, Hara? We use the metaphor that introvert, extrovert, and ambivert are triplets, and that the ambivert was the triplet who was forgotten.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And so it turns out that the structure of the book is going to be in 3 chapters each section. So it'll also, I think, will be nice in a playful way to connect to the central metaphors.
So I'm sure you've talked to a lot of people who are ambiverts, or once they hear the term and know what it means, realize that they're an ambivert in a world that's always talked about introverts and extroverts.
Right.
And I bet from talking just to people in your social orbit, wherever you go, patients, of course, as well. I mean, you get insights from people on being this kind of person, because I think it covers a lot more people than we've considered before. I mean, I know I am an intense extrovert at times and an intense introvert, go away please, at other times. I mean, and I've, always lived with that. I never had a name for it, but I always lived comfortably with it.
Right.
But it's nice to know. And, something that could be really interesting is the ways that people naively, and when I say naively, I mean without knowing the formal psychological designation of this condition.
Yeah.
How people have naively conceptualized or managed these two aspects of themselves. So there's a lot of richness there, I think, that you bring to the topic.
No, I think so too. And by the way, 1/3 to 2/3 of the population are ambiverts. So
not shocked. Yeah.
Not shocked. And Debbie came up with a really good title that she put on the chat, which was the double identity, which is compelling.
I definitely think that there's something to do in that, going down that road. I think that identity is not, I don't know, it suggests to me something else, but something. I think
double something. It seems like double something is getting somewhere.
You're getting warm.
Yeah.
Definitely getting warm. So.
Yeah, well, I'll keep you posted, and thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. You're very welcome.
And when you think of it in your sleep, just write me the next day. And
I'm not going to be thinking of too many things in my sleep for the next couple of weeks. So get settled in California. So.
All right, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Ooh, of two minds. That's cool.
Yep. I mean, so there are things in those veins, and and by the way, checking through a thesaurus could be really helpful.
Yeah.
In this case, because it could lead you to think of double things that weren't immediately falling into your vocabulary and could take you interesting places. So I suggest that as just a way of loosening and expanding the thinking before you contract it into a sharp possibility. That contains the meaning that you want.
No, that's great. I'll keep on going with it.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody, and thanks everybody for the comments. It really helps.
Good. So, what more do we need to milk out of grammar or red pens with bad teachers, who scared everybody about grammar and using grammar and how hard it might be and all the difficulties of it. So, nobody else?
I think the problem with grammar is that people don't know what they are afraid, don't know what they don't know, right? That there is some grammar police is going to come and tell them, like,
Exactly.
now,
Yeah.
and you don't know, you're like, oh my God, but I didn't know that, like, right? Like, I didn't realize to do that. And you're going to be suddenly, like, you know, exposed for
Right.
being a fraud that you didn't know. You should know better, right? We should have
Right.
gone through multiple schools, colleges, graduate school, right? You should know better. And like, you're illiterate. I think that's the biggest fear. Is
I do too. I think that's one of the things that inhibits people. You know, I talked about this actually the very first time that the first Sunday that we talked about this. And, you know, my idea was that so many people are inhibited from writing because they think if they put something down, the grammar police are going to descend and arrest them, or, you know, call them out or show them up as being fools or stupid.
I think it makes us all feel like it raises our imposter syndrome hairs on the back of our necks, you know, and makes us all feel like somebody's going to come and find out we're not as smart as
Yeah.
you know, we'd like to be, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of good things to say about teachers. Somehow or other, this grammar thing, I don't know, it didn't come out well. I mean, very few people, I mean, I love diagramming sentences, I did well, and I had an intuitive sense of grammar. I always say I never take credit for being a good speller or knowing how sentences fit together. I just always had an intuitive sense of it. But the way you get an intuitive sense of it is, I mean, I don't know. To me, it seems by immersing yourself in reading, and, you know, and just reading. But somehow or other, I don't know how many teachers just managed to screw that up so badly, taught it so badly that the only thing indelible from their lessons was, oh my God, this is an area I don't know, and I'm going to screw up, and someone's going to come and show me for being the idiot that I am. And
that diagram, and they're going to do one of those diagrams, and that
right. And the wrong thing is to dangle from the wrong part of the diagram. Yeah. See, now I aced all that, and I understood it because the taxonomy of language somehow all made sense to me, but I can see out of that. I don't expect the world to see that, but I really am upset that so many people have come out of those grammar lessons with just this terrible fear that they're going to screw up and they can't do it right, and it just becomes an inhibiting force. And that, I think, is so bad, because I think people do have stories to tell and they can speak their stories, which is why, by the way, capturing what you say is really very important. Very often in speaking things, I'm taking notes to myself, even when I'm speaking to others, because suddenly things are becoming clear in my own mind. But we're not inhibited by grammar when we're talking, or inhibited by the idea that we're transgressing grammarly. And yet when it comes to writing, we've just been, you know, just scared out of our wits. And somehow, if I do nothing else, I just want to tell you, work around that. Just write, and if you can talk a story, you can write a story. If you can manage to capture it, it may need a lot of work. There's a lot of problem solving besides just doing a narrative, but just disregard that whole grammar arrest that you think is waiting in the wings for you, the minute you put down your computer or your pen or whatever writing instrument that you're using. God, it's just so horrible that so many people have that. And I guess that's one of the implicit messages. I did discuss it explicitly the first time, but I think it's one of the implicit messages all along. And I'm glad we're having this discussion because it reminds me how explicit it needs to be and repeated so. And if I could do anything, it's to help people get over that crazy fear that, oh no, I can't write because this isn't going to be grammatical. And I'll be the fool. They'll know they'll see me as the fool that I really am. And that fourth grade teacher told me I was, or the fifth grade teacher. So.
I still am. I didn't even remember being afraid of this, Hara, but I remember being as afraid as the monster under the bed of semicolons. Like that was, I was like, they were equal fear when I was young.
The semicolon monster.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That had to be a bad teacher to do that. That's all I can say. You know? I mean,
I was just gonna say I've actually been good since I learned the word descriptivist from a tweet by Merriam-Webster, and somebody had written to them saying that they were wrong about a word, and they wrote back saying, "We're descriptivists. We describe how language is used. We're not trying to, you know."
Sorry, I didn't catch that. There was some static.
So what happened was, I don't remember the exact tweet, but someone tweeted the dictionary and told them they were wrong about a word. And then they tweeted back, "No, we're descriptivists. We just describe how words are used. We don't tell people what they mean." And so ever since I heard that, I've been good.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Liberated, right, Dwayne?
Yes. And it's funny because I do have one or two friends who happen to be prescriptivists, and they'll tell me that I'm using the wrong word in a situation, and I'll just have fun and I'll keep doing it.
Yeah, so, one of my great joys.
I'm sorry, Janice?
Nothing phases you. I can't imagine you ever having like an anxiety about feeling you're an idiot. You're just like, you chill, you're fine, like whatever.
I've seen Dwayne labor over his work. He, in a very good way, and very carefully concerned with, the meaning of the whole thing. No, we've had some discussions over the last year or two, right, Dwayne?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, no, I totally respect that care. That's what I love to see in a writer. That's how you know you're dealing with the real thing, when someone has that level of concern. But yeah, one of the things I love reading and I love doing is when someone uses a word in a way that just surprises me, different from the way everyone else uses it, and it just stops me. And it's like, wow, it's like I learn something every time that happens, and that becomes a spur to me to do something similar. It's a reminder to me of, goodbye, prescriptivist, don't tell me how to use my language. So we can take words that have well established meanings, but we can put them in new places where they just slap you in the face and become fresh and orient you to something new. And I think that's almost always good, and sometimes a lot better than the fuck or shit. So it's a different way to wake someone up. So
Janice, you should have seen me after my first semester of law school. It was not a happy time in my life.
Oh my God, talk about looking for another words. I remember above in my textbooks, above every word had a definition. and it looked like there were more definitions than there were words that I actually knew. There were like, I think the word "the" was the only word in the whole textbook I understood. I won't tell you about the anxiety attacks I had for like, I mean, not real anxiety attacks, but like, you know, like law school, yeah.
Yeah, no, we had, I mean, my writing teacher in law school would talk about I was writing in passive voice, but she would never explain well what passive voice was. And if you would have just said, this is a particular sentence construction and this is passive and this is active, that's all she had to do. But she spent the better part of a year trying to explain to me what passive voice meant. And she was never successful.
I don't know how I wrote with all my anxiety over grammar that I wrote onto moot court board. I mean, luckily, you know, it was like almost like really like, and then when I clerked for a judge for a semester, a federal judge. I think it was also like the full-time federal clerk judge, you know, he went to Yale and he wrote beautifully. And so when I'm clerking, he looked at me, he's like, okay, we're going to need to work on your grammar. And I'm like, oh my God.
Oh, the dreaded word. We're going to need to work on your grammar.
And he was just like you would think, like someone who was like an English, you know, major at Yale, right? He was just like, and I was like, oh my God, we're going to work. And I'm like, oh my God. But
Yale of the great English department, yes.
Yes, yeah. And that's where he went. And he was like, we're going to work. And I'm like, oh my God, this clerkship is going to give me anxiety. Yeah. And but he was excellent. I mean, I really did learn a lot from him because he did care and he loved English and explaining, but I don't know.
Yeah, I ended up running a newspaper in law school, and everybody working for me were actual journalists who had been journalists before law school. I don't know how I got this job, but they said, no, you're the right guy for it. And I'm like, but everybody else is a journalist. So I had to step my entire game up just to make sure I could edit what they were writing.
So that's interesting. So what kinds of interesting that they left journalism to go into law, but interesting also, what did you learn from them? The things that you learned from what they were doing or how they wrote?
So a lot actually, because I would have somebody write something, then I would have two separate people edit, and then I would run an edit myself. And so one of them was really good at finding historical facts. So, you know, let's say that you allude to something in your piece and he said, no, this is the wrong example because this is exactly what actually happened. And so it wasn't just about commas or anything like that. It was really
content. Yeah.
Yeah. So like a lot of that and some of how to put a story together and some of, you know, what they might be looking for when they were editing as well. So, it actually helped out my writing a lot.
Good. That's great. So, guys, I'm going to call it quits because I've got to pack. I'm traveling to California for an unknown period of time, leaving the flood behind me here. And, but next week, I will be happy to do this from what I hope will be sunny LA. Hopefully I'll be able even to sit outdoors in the pergola and chat from there. But who knows what will pop into my mind between now and then as suitable topics.